Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right in and impartially breaking down a highly specific set of political arguments that recently aired on Fox Business. We're going to be looking at a really interesting conversation between host Larry Kudlow and Hoover Institution historian Victor Davis Hanson. Basically, they're dissecting what they see as a massive shift in power dynamics within the Democratic Party, specifically the rise of what they are calling democratic socialism. Now, we're going to focus strictly on the actual architecture of their argument. That means looking at how they define the problem, what they claim the root causes are, and finally, the exact electoral solutions they're proposing to counter it. So here is our agenda for today. First up, the socialist power shift. Second, the anti-Semitism allegation. Third, campaign rhetoric versus reality. And finally, number 4, the proposed GOP playbook. All right, let's get into Section 1, the socialist power shift. We'll be looking at Hanson's theory on the rise of radicalism. Now, Hanson doesn't see this sudden acquisition of power by democratic socialists as just some random ideological drift. He actually argues it's the result of 3 very distinct catalysts. First, he says the mainstream Democratic establishment has effectively lost power, citing their struggles with the presidency, Congress, and the Supreme Court, which has created a massive vacuum. Second, he points to a consuming obsession with Donald Trump that he claims pushes the party further left. But it's really the third point he emphasizes the most. He describes a post-October 7th nexus. And by nexus, Hanson means a dangerous merging and emulation of radicalism between certain immigrant communities and activists on college campuses following the October 7th attacks. He claims that the Democratic Party establishment tried to appease this growing faction, only to realize way too late that they had completely lost control of their own base. Moving on to Section 2, the anti-Semitism allegation, covering the alleged links between socialism and bigotry. This brings us to a really core, incredibly emotionally charged part of their critique. And honestly, it's exactly the kind of heavy-hitting rhetoric you can expect to dominate your news feeds moving forward. Take this direct quote from Donald Trump, which was actually played during the Fox Business broadcast. He was targeting a political candidate named Abdul El-Sayed, saying he doesn't love Israel, he doesn't love Jewish people, he hates them. Kudlow actually praises this really blunt approach. He argues the GOP simply cannot afford to go soft here. The conservative argument is that criticism of Israel from the far left isn't just a basic geopolitical disagreement, but is deeply rooted in outright bigotry that needs to be called out aggressively. To deepen this point, Hanson relies on a pretty stark historical comparison. He reminds viewers that, quote, "We forget it wasn't just Hitler that was anti-Semite, Stalin was too." By bringing Stalin into the mix, Hanson is very explicitly trying to tether modern democratic socialism directly to the historical horrors of 20th century communism. He claims that whenever these ideologies gain traction, the Jewish people end up becoming a receptacle for frustrated individuals, people who are looking to blame hidden cosmic forces for their own personal or societal shortcomings. And according to Hanson, this historical pattern, it's repeating itself right now. So what does this look like on today's political battlefield? Well, Hanson asserts that this hatred has essentially become a 360-degree movement. Basically, he means it's a wave of hostility crashing in from literally every side, both the far left and the far right. In this scenario, he posits that the mainstream Republican Party and the MAGA movement are the only ones left acting as a desperate finger in the dike, just trying to hold back the flood. Meanwhile, Kudlow directs some really heavy criticism across the aisle. He specifically targets Democratic leaders like Chuck Schumer, who is the highest-ranking Jewish politician in the U.S., accusing him and the wider Democratic Party of staying entirely silent while synagogues face threats and socialist rhetoric escalates. All right, Section 3, campaign rhetoric versus reality. Let's dig into this alleged political bait-and-switch. So a really crucial part of Hanson's argument focuses on how these candidates operate once they make that transition from campaigning to actually governing. Hanson claims there's a deliberate, deceptive strategy going on here. On the campaign trail, he says candidates use softer, much more palatable branding. They just run as progressives. But once they're actually sworn into office, the mask slips. They don't just govern as socialists, he claims they govern as almost communists, pushing a hard left agenda that voters literally never signed up for. To ground this idea in reality, Hanson points to a truly staggering number: 850,000. He references a New York politician named Zohan Mamdani, who Hanson claims compiled a list targeting 850,000 New Yorkers for one simple reason: owning 2 homes. Hanson uses this specific story to perfectly illustrate that bait and switch. He argues that Mamdani never advertised this kind of policy on the campaign trail, and that it flips the whole American tradition of innocent until proven guilty entirely on its head, basically treating property ownership itself as inherently suspicious. Finally, Section 4,
The proposed GOP playbook. Let's look at Hanson and Kudlow's strategy for the midterms.
Okay, so it's one thing to outline a political threat, right? It's a whole other thing to actually beat it. And their strategy starts with funding. The number they are throwing around is massive, $400 million. Hanson points out that individual Republican candidates might really struggle to out-fundraise their opponents on a local level. So to fix that, he recommends taking Donald Trump's massive MAGA war chest, which totals nearly $400 million, and deploying that entire sum exclusively on midterm television commercials.
But what exactly should $400 million buy you? Hanson outlines a very precise three-step ad strategy, and it's definitely worth paying attention to because this is the exact architecture of the political ads you're going to be seeing non-stop in the coming months. Step 1. Use the opponent's exact unedited words. Don't even try to spin it, just play the clips at what they've said and let their own words convict them. Step 2. Highlight their rhetoric against success. Hanson points out that these candidates often attack oligarchs and highly successful figures like Elon Musk, which he thinks will completely alienate aspirational American voters. And step 3, what Kudlow calls punching through the veil of affordability. Kudlow argues that the progressive platform of affordable living is just a complete ruse, and he says the GOP has to aggressively tear down that facade.
So how exactly do they plan to punch through that veil? Well, they argue it's all about relentlessly contrasting economic realities. Hanson and Kudlow believe the GOP absolutely must highlight the stark economic differences between the two administrations. They want every single commercial to remind voters that under Joe Biden, the inflation rate hovered around 5.2%, whereas under Donald Trump, it was significantly lower. They believe that bypassing all the complex policy debates and just hammering home this simple comparison, the cost of living then versus now, is basically the silver bullet to defeating the progressive wing at the ballot box. So we've walked through the entire architecture of their argument today, from the alleged causes of radicalization, straight through those historical comparisons, all the way down to a $400 million midterm ad strategy. Understanding this framework gives us a really vital preview of the messaging battles that are about to dominate our airwaves. But the ultimate question still remains. When all this rhetoric meets reality, will this aggressive strategy of emphasizing historical links and contrasting inflation data actually resonate with voters? As we head closer to the midterms, it definitely leaves us wondering just how blurry the line between campaign rhetoric and actual governance has become. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious.